Capital One is our sponsor here at OSCON for a day of discussions about open source and why it is so important for new stack organizations everywhere. Capital One is at the forefront of this new open source world with several efforts such as the opening of its APIs and open sourcing core technologies such as Hygeia, its DevOps dashboard. Learn more about Capital One and its focus on developers at developer.capitalone.com.
Good. Hey guys, this is Lee Calcote with the new stack. We're here at OSCON in Austin. I'm joined by a couple of individuals from Univa as well as from Sysdig. Gentlemen, if you don't mind, maybe we can go around and you can give yourselves a quick introduction.
Sure. My name is Loris Degioanni. I am the founder and CEO of Sysdig. I've been active in open source and monitoring for a very long time. In particular, Sysdig is my second company. My first company was called Case Technologies and was the commercial entity behind a very well-known network analyzer called Wireshark. So a lot of networks, a lot of open source, and a lot of visibility and monitoring in my background.
Beautiful. And Rob?
Yeah, I'm Rob Lalonde. I'm with Univa. It's a company. NavOps is the division we're responsible for. We essentially do container cluster provisioning and orchestration of workload and policy management for containers at sort of enterprise scale. We came from the high-performance computing space, really, really big clusters of 2 million cores, and kind of bring all that experience of managing workloads in that kind of space over to the container world.
Makes sense. And Cameron?
Yes, this is Cameron Brunner from Univa Corporation as well, and I'm the chief architect on the NavOps product suite as well as director of engineering. Rob gave a great overview of Univa, so I guess I don't need to add anything there.
Oh, very good. Well, guys, thanks for joining me today, this afternoon. It's actually a really nice day here in Austin. We had a flurry of conferences the last couple of weeks. The OpenStack Summit was here. It was in the same convention center. After that, we had a really tiny unconference, DevOps Days. Austin was here, and so I feel like this city's about conferenced out. Well, so it's good to have you guys here, though. I hope you've gotten your fill of brisket, some barbecue.
Working on it.
Okay. Good. Well, then you can go take your afternoon nap after this. Oh, good. Well, I'm just enthralled by what each of you guys do. Actually, I understand. Univa in particular has had a recent announcement. I think around NavOps, and I don't know with as recent an announcement as that is. I suspect a lot of listeners may not necessarily know NavOps, and/or my understanding is there's something of a product line there as well in terms of different capabilities that are offered. And so, what does that look like? What is NavOps?
Sure. So NavOps is a suite of products around managing container workloads, and essentially we have two solutions. Launch, which was launched, it's a mouthful, last fall, and it's around cluster provisioning, so building container clusters very easily, and it's Kubernetes-based. You said you had some Kubernetes experience and affinity, so yeah, it's all around Kubernetes, and that's for very easily building a cluster. So whether that's on-premise or in the cloud or you hybrid cluster, and it's got policy management, so it can sort of dynamically, elastically grow the cluster as needed and push some up into the cloud as your workload expands beyond what you can do on-premise. You can start building up cloud nodes and putting work there, and then as workload goes down, you can deprovision automatically and bring things back to just on-prem. So that's what Launch is about. It's about provisioning and hybrid cloud and elastic cloud. And then what we just announced at the show is our Command product, and it's really taking our product that is our roots, Grid Engine, bringing that to containers. So it's policy management and event workload placement. I don't know if of course Joe Beda, he called it superpowers for Kubernetes the other day. And I thought, that's a cool name. I'm going to do a t-shirt for that or something. But it's essentially around advanced policy management for Kubernetes. So when organizations have limited resources available and want to really have a lot of complexity around how they're managing their application, what runs where, who runs what ratios they're going to run in, who has access to things, all those kind of complex placement policies. It's almost infinite combinations of how you might want to run things, and that's what our policy engine is all about.
Scheduling and policy can just be such a complicated, thing to both get right, and just, with all the variety of needs that are application specific and customer organization specific. It's a sweet space for you guys to be in. Let me make sure I understand Grid Engine itself just kind of well, and that's if you take Grid Engine and deploy it as a policy and scheduling algorithm kind of framework, does that, inside of a Kubernetes deployment, does that end up, would you displace Kubernetes scheduler as kind of the default scheduler and bring in Grid Engine, or?
Exactly. So let me clarify. Grid Engine was our core technology. It runs in traditional clusters. You have batch workload, and that's what we brought into our new product line. It's not called Grid Engine. It's called Command. So that's okay. Just so Command is the product we're talking about. Yeah, and it uses some of the Grid Engine capabilities, but it's not Grid Engine. So just to clarify for people, but Command, it basically turns off the Kubernetes scheduler, which is kind of 1/10 of the overall Kubernetes system, right? And Kubernetes scheduler is decent. It's kind of it's a socialistic in that a lot of things are equal within the Kubernetes world, and things get to run sort of with equal priorities. And we can take things to a very different level as far as sort of what the enterprise wants to do. Maybe some work requires GPUs, and that work will go to those nodes, or maybe you have access control lists, or you don't want people getting code from certain repositories, all those kinds of things. You want to add any color?
I would like to say, there is multi-scheduler support coming in Kubernetes, and we will be playing with that. So there are going to be use cases where the Kubernetes scheduler would be running maybe on some of your hosts. The fact that NavOps command itself is run inside of Kubernetes as a pod, that's one of the deployment models that we'll be potentially supporting, is the default Kubernetes scheduler, making sure that command is running, and then command would run, the rest of your work.
Oh, okay, interesting. So you'd have sort of two-level scheduling at that point.
Yeah. So, it would be, you would configure the Kubernetes scheduler to be very, restricted on what it would be looking at. But yeah, obviously it's a solid scheduler. It's done, I think, very well for the community, and really there's been a ton of great work, I think, in this multi-scheduler support. So we definitely want to play in that environment, and we also do want to work in the case where people just want to run hours, in which case we would do static pod scheduling. So you would pick a host or a set of hosts where it would start up automatically.
And then just considering Univa's heritage in terms of being focused in the HPC space and kind of big jobs, big data, has that given a slant to NavOps and kind of its focus in terms of some of the capabilities it brings forward? Are there particular HPC land capabilities that NavOps has? Or
that's a good question. I think the complexity of that world, like you said, there's just so many different combinations of how people want to do things. Every organization is different in the way they want to manage their policies. Some of our customers run 5 million jobs a day. Some are, much less than that, but running 2 million cores, but longer running jobs. So there's a real variety of how people want to do things, and having that sort of robust policy engine that's been proven for 8 years out in the marketplace, and kind of bringing that into containers brings a pretty robust, deep solution.
Yeah, it goes to your point about how you said, there's a lot of organizational requirements, and they vary between organization. That's something, with the history of Grid Engine, we've been able to really kind of build into the core feature set, into our policy engine. So we feel it has a really good potential to fit a lot of customer needs.
And interesting that you can deploy that your scheduler in a couple of different ways, but as you go to deploy things, particularly in containerized, container land, and as people step into microservices, deployments get more complicated. There's more things to monitor and to manage. And at Loris, I understand that's where a tool like Sysdig and even your Sysdig Cloud can step in and really enable, give people container. Was it container vision? Can you tell us about that?
And just actually deploying monitoring becomes more complicated, right? Because from this point of view, the world is definitely changing, and it's becoming better. And there are a lot of really cool things that you can do with Kubernetes and with Docker and with modern orchestration. At the same time, typically every time there's a major shift like this one, there are also challenges to solve. And typically the industry starts working at trying to solve these challenges for the new world. So we're seeing a lot of smart people at work right now trying to figure out networking, storage, scheduling for containers and for things like Kubernetes. We focus on monitoring. We focus on monitoring starting from the deployment. So how do you deploy monitoring on something like Kubernetes? How can we make it as good as it was before, or maybe even better? Can we leverage the orchestrator to deploy monitoring in a more easy way? So, for example, our monitoring works by deploying a container in your infrastructure. This container is scheduled on each of the hosts. This container can see the other containers running on the same host, the ones that are already running or the ones that will run in the future. And this container is able to deeply extract metrics without any configuration. The metric collection is another nice challenge and very interesting challenge, because containers, the isolation of containers and the simplicity of containers are big advantages and selling points of the concept of containerizing your applications, but also make getting the metrics, and I'm not only talking about the CPU of a container, but the network, application, system level metrics for what's running inside containers they are challenging to extract without breaking the container model, and container vision is exactly this. It's a patent pending technology that allows us to, for example, give you, I don't know, your application response time, or your slow database queries, or your garbage collection, Java garbage collection statistics for your application running in a container or in a pod, but from another container without requiring you to instrument your own container.
That's fantastic. Actually, of the capabilities that you mentioned, I think I'm having, those capabilities span a few different sort of classical monitoring and management capabilities between time series and systems management, and with some of the garbage collection that you were talking about, a little bit of APM-ish capabilities. I've seen some alerts and alert integration that you guys have in Sysdig Cloud. So is there an end to the are we talking anomaly detection next and event processing, or are we
it's interesting that you asked, because exactly this morning we announced another open source project called Falco. And Falco essentially builds a rule engine on top of our data source, so that you can do some stuff like anomaly detection. To give you some examples, for example, you can create a rule. Actually, it's already part of the project. You have a rule that detects when somebody logs in a container, does a SSH connection into a container, or when somebody changes a system file, or when somebody installs something in a container, or when a connection, an unwanted connection is made. And this is based essentially on the same instrumentation, but the beauty of this is being able to see inside the other containers. So I'm able to tell you if any of your containers orchestrated, for example, with Kubernetes, is being attacked without you having to put any kind of code inside the container. And I'm able to deploy this as just another container. So the deployment is completely straightforward and makes it smoother to essentially have this kind of functionality in your infrastructure. We announced it this morning, so it's on GitHub.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's exciting. Yeah. You guys are, okay. Well, there are lots of ththings happening here at OSCON.
Yeah, too many.
Announcements from all around, from Rob and Cameron as well. I think when I traditionally think of kind of anomaly detection, dynamic baselining, adaptive baselining, outlier detection, these types of things, I typically think of it in sort of this time series kind of, mentality. But of the use cases that you described, those sounded somewhat, security oriented in nature, in terms of being able to determine, if the different behaviors are happening. And so that's an interesting perspective as well. So Falco is the...
Yeah, and from this point of view, I was actually having a conversation here at OSCON during lunch, and one of the points that we touched was the convergence of these areas that were different verticals, right, in the past, and the fact this is actually a DevOps involved in deploying things like Kubernetes every day, and we were agreeing on the fact that modern IT, Kubernetes, Mesos, Docker, and so on, really are something that is really enabling the convergence of multiple areas, and more and more today, the person in charge of security, the person in charge of analytics, the person in charge of monitoring tend to converge, into a single group that is responsible for these different things, just because the platform enables that, because the platform is more dynamic and easier, essentially, to structure in this way.
It's interesting how the tools begin to define and sort of redefine people's identities and just what they call themselves, what titles they carry. And, interestingly enough, about the tools tools that Univa, NavOps, and Sysdig have, this set of tooling is very complementary in terms of platforms for running containerized infrastructure with scheduling algorithms and other things, and then also how to monitor and manage those environments. I guess let me ask each of you this, just to talk about some things that are complementary and or just ways of kind of contrasting against other offerings in similar spaces. So from a NavOps perspective, things like other Kubernetes distributions start to pop to mind between Tectonic or OpenShift, not necessarily a distro, but certainly wrapping Kubernetes. I believe ElasticCube is potentially another one, but just a couple of comments on how you guys view their offerings and kind of contrast against what NavOps launch and Command are.
Yeah, I wouldn't even contrast. I think we see those as all client platforms for us, right? We run on any Kubernetes distribution. So if it's Rancher or Tectonic or OpenShift, because we're sitting up at that API level above Kubernetes, we work with all of those. So we view all of those as potential partners where we can bring the advanced policy management to those platforms. So,
okay, got it.
So yeah. Yep. Not competitive at all.
Yeah,
it's
so
a
that's
great
specifically for Command. I think launch is where there is a lot more overlap, but launch is something that we just make freely available. We were looking at it as a way to help people who are having challenges, getting Kubernetes up and running.
Yeah,
and we still think it fits for some other people, but there are other great solutions out there. Even the stuff for developers, the stuff that's in the Kubernetes repository directly for building test clusters is often adequate. The Vagrant, the kubectl scripts, and things like that. Right. But we still feel launch fits some areas and some use cases.
Hybrid cloud use cases.
Yeah,
sure.
Really interesting.
People have to go from day zero to day one. They've got to get to day one somehow.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. And then like what Rob was saying, the things that we're adding on top now are these, integrations with a hybrid support. Our view of doing this kind of mixed platform installation. So it overlaps there a little bit with Kubernetes, if you're familiar with that project.
There's been some steps towards that in 1.2, but
right. So yeah, there's definitely some synergies and some, I think interesting use cases that will come out.
Well, just kind of turning to Loris and to Sysdig in terms of, recognizing now that Sysdig spans a number of those sort of classical categories, but maybe picking on time series for a moment and just some recent announcements from the CNCF and sort of the adoption of Prometheus, which plays right in the time series. There's also other, time series metrics providers that I would think operate in a similar fashion as to Sysdig Cloud in terms of receiving metrics, being pushed to, if you will, and push and pull is certainly a topic maybe we can talk about. I know it's
spend the afternoon discussing.
There's lots of bigotry and religious, but Librato from SolarWinds kind of falls into that space of receiving, being a SaaS offering for time series metrics, and I don't know if you've spent much time with them or maybe with others that I'm not mentioning, but just how do you contrast Sysdig Cloud offering from others?
So when we embarked in building both open source Sysdig and Sysdig Cloud, we decided to start with a blank sheet of paper. So it was like we had the luxury, to be a very young company at the time. So we see Docker exploding, we see Kubernetes exploding, and we're like, okay, how do you rethink monitoring to be ready for this age? So compared to the vendors that you mentioned and essentially any other vendor in the space, for example, our product tries to focus on the complete stack. So most of the vendors that you mentioned are consumers of metrics, and they do a fantastic job at doing that. They are products that are optimized for that. At the same time, as I was mentioning before, just the production of metrics tends to be complicated in an orchestrated environment, especially if it's based on containers. It's complicated by the elasticity and the dynamic nature of the environment. It's complicated by the relative opaqueness of containers. So we start from a technology that is designed to collect these metrics with as little effort as possible, which is something that I always say everybody says in the industry, So it's hard to differentiate here, but like we really put like 2 years of intellectual property just to make it possible for you to get. I was mentioning before, for example, the response time of an application running inside the container or a pod with zero configuration whatsoever. That is not only nice to have because then you don't need to. You spend less time configuring it. It's a must-have for in an orchestrated environment in which you get your container from the Docker Hub or from your private hub. It's completely clean. You don't have the luxury of going there and making changes just to enable monitoring. So we try to solve the problem at the root there, and then we try to offer a product that is work less in terms of monitoring, but especially even in terms of like user interaction and user interface, deeply integrated with the orchestrator APIs. So we interface with the Kubernetes API, we interface with the Mesos API, and we go pick the different pods and containers that are running on different physical machines, and we're able to make sense from this information and expose you, for example, the response time for your service as a whole by averaging your different containers without you having to go and do this step manually. So with other products you can do that, but you need to tag your metrics. First of all, you need to get your metrics, which is not trivial. Then you need to tag them in the proper way. Then you need to manually essentially talk to like Kubernetes to understand how to correlate the tags, and then you need to configure like your dashboards and views to present this information. With our product, it comes out of the box essentially.
I got it. Okay. One thing that I'm seeing as outside of just NavOps and Sysdig being very complementary in terms of capabilities, but just the approach that each of you guys have taken, I think is artful in terms of how it is that you deploy a Sysdig. In terms of deploying that in a container alongside other containers on the host, and then Cameron, from your description of how you might deploy your policy or your scheduling engine as well inside of a pod, which is essentially the smallest unit of scheduling within Kubernetes, and just so kudos on your selections there. Makes for that getting from day 0 to day 1 just even easier. So, and I may be drawing too much on this, and so Rob, put me in check if this is it. But just understanding Univa's sort of HPC-ish, heritage. In terms of as you guys came to container orchestrators and kind of placing your investment into one versus the next, Mesos and Mesos specifically is sort of born of the day of big data and kind of some of those use cases, longer scheduled jobs, batch things. How did you guys come to Kubernetes as the one, so to speak?
Do you want to take that? Yeah, so what we really liked about Kubernetes when we were looking at these solutions last year was it really provided the solution, the full solution, we felt. Once you have, it has the load balancing, it has the services, it allows somebody to actually put together an application and pretty much have most of the questions, I think, answered on how you get it highly available and how you should put it together. I think there's a lot more work in the other solutions, and like how you decide to do data, how do you decide to do load balancing, how do you decide to do your networking. These are a lot more questions, and from our background, we want NavOps obviously to be attractive to general data center applications, but also work with our traditional customers if they have these types of needs, and they're coming, they're learning about this stuff as well. So having more of this stuff kind of decided, I think, is what was definitely an attractive solution. So we also really like the general community around Kubernetes and the fact that it was a lot of companies coming together. The fact that Google very much has released it to the the open source community, and we saw that it just really happened, but that process started last year.
Yeah.
So
we didn't know at the time when we started this. We selected Kubernetes from a technical perspective. We didn't know the groundswell from the ecosystem and how many companies were going to actually adopt Kubernetes as part of their platform, and that we'd actually have this stack that we could sit on from all kinds of different vendors that was Kubernetes-based. So it's gone great from our perspective.
So kudos on your selection. Yeah, and just of the other container orchestrators in this space too. tough, kind of tough call to make. Just it's a fast-moving space and lots of functionality being built in. And so, in terms of community and things, have you guys found yourselves, or in what way have you guys found yourselves sort of playing within that community, contributing back, or?
Yeah, we've been involved with CNCF since the beginning. We were actually a founding member. We were fortunate to get to know some of the guys at Google in the early days as they were kind of figuring out what they were going to do with Kubernetes. So we were there from the early days. Cameron's been involved in a number of special interest groups on the Kubernetes side of things and has been active and has done a few contributions and stuff like that. We'd like to do more, certainly, but yeah, we're staying real close to that CNCF community and the ecosystem, and specifically the Kubernetes guys.
I might, so next OSCON, I might find you guys with Kubernetes tattoos somewhere on the, okay.
He's got one already.
Oh, very good. So speaking of community, CNCF, with the adoption of Prometheus here recently, just I don't know to what extent it makes sense for something, an open source project like Sysdig to seek out a benevolent foundation or not, but any thoughts that you had on the incubation of that project and/or potential incubation of something like Sysdig?
Yeah, by the way, as a company, we are part of CNCF as well, so we definitely support it. It's, fantastic for the community in a general way, and it's, we are really committed to seeing it successful. In terms of Sysdig, we were discussing this essentially last week internally. We still don't have a clear position there. Things to weight, benefits and drawbacks. One of the things that we've benefited in the Sysdig development up to this point is speed. That comes from a bit more control. On the other hand, CNCF could absolutely be a great home for it.
Trade-offs kind of all around. Okay, yeah.
I think too, the CNCF philosophy, as far as I understand it, is that this doesn't have to be just one solution in one category, right? It depends on people's needs, and that's why there is this layer cake where different components can be plugged in. So
I think from the open source point of view, one thing that that is important to clarify is that, like for example, Sysdig open source is extremely complementary to Prometheus, because while Prometheus focuses more on the real time series data collection, Sysdig open source is your troubleshooting tool, your less mild tool that you use to dive deep and find your issues.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, and I think that both of you guys are kind of calling out two different ways in which, Sysdig and Prometheus, complementary tooling, use different, some. One's got a particular focus, different purposes used in different ways. Moreover, Rob, one solution doesn't fit all, use cases or organizations. And I think that goes back to kind of your guys' point around NavOps and just how it complements other, or NavOps launch maybe specifically, how it and Command, how they can complement and ride on top of other distros, or and for different customers, different needs. And so, speaking of different customers and just being here at OSCON and things, I recognize this question may be ill-placed with just sort of the timing of the launch of of your guys' release on NavOps, and also kind of Falco, but any early adopters that you've seen, or kind of customer feedback that you're getting, or in engagements and interactions you're having here that either are very validating of some of those choices that we talked about, or what kind of feedback are you getting?
Yeah, on the floor itself, it's hard to talk to somebody that isn't planning a major container initiative, big companies, small companies, you name it. So I think what we're seeing is, this groundswell continuing, and the adoption and the maturity moving along at a pretty reasonable pace. Everybody's got to develop the applications first, right? So it's not like, turn it on and let's go microservices. There's a lot of engineers have to do real work before they get to that point. So getting to production and getting to scale is a process that takes time, but we're certainly, we're really encouraged by a lot of the people we've talked to and the maturity level they're at, and the number of people that are saying, yeah, I'm going Kubernetes, I've already made a decision, or yes, I'm going OpenShift. And we could lead right into our Command story about how they're going to get to scale, and then they're going to have these issues.
Beautiful. Okay.
Yeah, the most interesting thing for me was just sitting during the keynotes this morning, and it really felt like the community, the open source community as a whole now is really embracing and focusing on this, on how IT is going to look, and that involves containers, that involves new ways of writing software, that involves microservices, that involves orchestration. But it really, it's really it's the main subject of discussion, everywhere in this in a conference like this, and it's pretty amazing, A couple of just 2 or 3 years ago, it was big data and mobile,
wow.
and cloud, and now it's this, So to me, there's no question. This is where people are going. There's no question. This is an important issue to address and work on, not only for companies but also for the community, and there's no question it's very exciting.
And for some of us out there kind of on the bleeding edge like you guys, I recognize it can take some patience for folks to kind of come and get there and recognize that people have legacy things they've got to take care of and love on and pet from occasionally. I recognize what Rob has said, this groundswell just continues to happen. We've got Open Container Day at OSCON yesterday, so just a track entirely dedicated to that. So certainly that's there. Another movement that's been happening for a while, but I think is gaining speed is the Internet of Things, or IoT, and I thought I'd throw that out there as a conversation piece for you guys in terms of whether or not you're seeing those use cases touch on your efforts or your tools.
Absolutely. We just talked to a prospect 10 minutes ago before we walked over here, and that's exactly what they were doing. They were building monitoring and communications for the edge device, and in their case, the edge device isn't the firewall; it's the refrigerator or whatever it is out on the perimeter that they're actually connecting to. So they're bringing all that information together, and of course, right away, containers are the things that can make this possible because it'll run on any of these devices, and we don't have to build for each different platform. We're seeing some of that, and I know in automotive we've heard a lot of talk about Internet of Things and containers for that use case, but still early days in that market too.
Sure. So
good, sort of two emerging markets coming together at the same time.
Yeah, and one is essentially based on producing more and more data, and the other one is the requirement to crunch all of this data. So they sort of growing parallel.
You guys are going to be busy here over the next few years. You can see it.
Very likely so.
Good. Well, Cameron, Rob, Loris, thanks for joining me today. This has been great. I certainly got an education, I think, all around. So it's good to have you guys here, and thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
it was a pleasure.
Thanks, Lee.
Thanks, guys.
Capital One is our sponsor here at OSCON for a day of discussions about open source and why it is so important for new stack organizations everywhere. Capital One is at the forefront of this new open source world with several efforts such as the opening of its APIs and open sourcing core technologies such as Hygieia, its DevOps dashboard. Learn more about Capital One and its focus on developers at developer.capitalone.com.